In the annals of Hollywood history, few stories are as complex, as layered, and as profoundly tragic as that of John Christopher Depp II. At 62 years old, a man who once represented the very pinnacle of artistic freedom, cinematic brilliance, and unbridled creativity now finds himself in a position that defies simple explanation. This is not a story about a villain or a victim, it is the story of a human being caught in the machinery of modern fame, a cautionary tale about the price of artistic genius, and a meditation on how a life can transform from one of boundless possibility to one marked by loss, isolation, and profound regret. The tragedy of Johnny Depp is not singular. It is not one moment, one accusation, or one failure. Instead, it is the accumulation of choices, circumstances, misunderstandings, and the relentless machinery of celebrity that has slowly, methodically dismantled a man who once seemed untouchable. John Christopher Depp II was born on June 9, 1963, in Owensboro, Kentucky. His childhood was not the stuff of Hollywood legend. His father, John Depp, was an engineer from Massachusetts. His mother, Betty Sue, was a waitress and former actress. By all accounts, Johnny's early years were marked by normalcy, a normalcy that would become increasingly foreign to him as he aged. The Depp family moved frequently. Military bases, suburbs, small towns. Young Johnny was a child of movement, of transience. His parents' marriage was unstable, filled with the kind of tension that leaves marks on developing minds. When Johnny was 15, his parents divorced. His mother was granted primary custody, but the damage had already been done. The boy who would become one of the world's most enigmatic actors had already learned that nothing is permanent, that families can fracture, and that pain is just another normal part of existence. Music became his refuge. Johnny picked up a guitar at age 12, and by his teenage years, he had become proficient. In an era of punk rock and new wave, young Johnny was drawn to the raw energy of rebellion. He formed a band called The Kids, played in local venues, dreamed of rock stardom. In many ways, that teenage Johnny Depp, the one playing guitar in dingy clubs, might have been happier than any version of Johnny Depp that came after. He was talented, undoubtedly. But he was also restless. Like many sensitive, artistic teenagers, Johnny possessed a quality that is both a gift and a curse. He felt things deeply. The world around him seemed either transcendent or unbearable, with very little middle ground. This extremity of feeling would define his life. In 1980, at the age of 17, Johnny dropped out of high school. His parents' divorce, the instability of his home life, and his burning desire to pursue music led him to make the decision that would set his entire life on a different trajectory. He didn't know it then, but that decision would ultimately lead him away from music and towards something far larger, cinema, fame, and all the complications that come with it. By the early 1980s, Johnny Depp had relocated to Los Angeles with his band, The Kids. He was handsome in an unconventional way, not the typical Hollywood leading man. He had a delicate beauty, an intellectual quality in his eyes, and an air of artistic integrity that suggested he was too serious for mere entertainment. The band never achieved major success, but it opened doors. In 1984, at 21 years old, Johnny Depp was cast in a small television role. One role became another. Small parts in forgettable television shows. And then, in 1986, he auditioned for a role in a film called Nightmare on Elm Street. He was cast as Glenn Quist, a minor character who dies in the first act, literally sucked into a bed and exploded in a geyser of blood. It was a small role, barely memorable, but it was the entry point. From 1987 to 1989, Johnny appeared in increasingly substantial television roles, including a starring role in the teen detective show 21 Jump Street. Suddenly, at 25 years old, Johnny Depp was famous. Teenage girls screamed his name. He appeared in Tiger Beat. He was a television star. And he absolutely hated it. This is a crucial moment in understanding the tragedy of Johnny Depp. The thing he had worked toward, fame, recognition, a career in entertainment, had arrived, and it repulsed him. He found the teenage hysteria degrading. He felt trapped in a role that didn't represent who he actually was. In interviews from this period, there's a palpable sense of frustration and rage. He famously said he would set himself on fire if it would help him escape the role and the fame that came with it. Here, we see the beginning of a pattern that would define his entire career, the tension between the artistic vision and the machinery of fame, between the quiet, sensitive artist and the public's need for a simplified version of him. Desperate to escape the teen idol image, Johnny Depp made a series of deliberate choices. He worked with independent filmmakers. He took roles that were deliberately unglamorous, often playing troubled or outcast characters. He wanted to be taken seriously as an artist, not as a pretty face for teeny-bopper magazines. In 1990, he appeared in Cry Baby, directed by John Waters. In 1991, Edward Scissorhands, directed by Tim Burton. These films began to establish Johnny Depp as something different, an actor willing to take risks, to play strange and oddly sympathetic characters. Burton's Edward Scissorhands in particular became a cult classic and established a partnership between the director and actor that would produce some of his most celebrated work. Throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, Johnny Depp became known as a serious, accomplished actor. He worked with prestigious directors. He won awards. He became wealthy beyond imagination. By the early 2000s, he was one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. And yet, something was beginning to go wrong. By his own admission, Johnny Depp has struggled with substance abuse for much of his adult life. He began smoking marijuana as a teenager. Throughout his 20s and 30s, his drug use expanded to include cocaine and other substances. By the 1990s, he was regularly using heroin, though he has been careful to note that he never used a needle, always smoking it instead, as if that particular distinction mattered. For many years, Johnny seemed to handle it. The drugs became part of his image as an artistic rebel. He was a rock and roll actor in an era when such things were still somewhat romantically regarded. He was friends with bands. He partied with other actors and musicians. He seemed to be living the life that his teenage self had dreamed of. But there was a cost. In 1994, Johnny Depp became engaged to British supermodel Kate Moss. They were both symbols of their era, he, the artistic rebel, she, the waif-like icon of minimalist chic. They dated on and off for 13 years. By all accounts, the relationship was tumultuous, marked by passion and instability. Johnny has spoken about his deep feelings for Moss, and their relationship seemed to represent something about him, the artistic tortured soul, the sensitive rebel who could never quite be happy. The relationship ended in 1997. For Johnny, it felt like a profound loss. He retreated into himself. In an interview, he would later describe the experience of losing Moss as devastating, something that took him years to get over. Around the same time, Johnny was dealing with other pressures. The film industry was changing. The roles that had once seemed career-defining were becoming increasingly commercial. He was asked to be the voice of a cartoon skunk. He was offered massive contracts for franchise films. He was becoming, against his will, a star of significant commercial magnitude. In 1997, in a moment of frustration, Johnny Depp got drunk and destroyed his hotel room in New York City. He was arrested, charged with criminal mischief. It was a moment that seemed almost absurd, a wealthy, successful actor destroying property while intoxicated, but it was also a signal that something was unraveling. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, Johnny began to develop a pattern. He would be photographed looking increasingly disheveled. There were strange incidents. He was involved in a physical altercation with a photographer. He was seen in various states of apparent intoxication. The narrative in the media began to shift from troubled artistic genius to troubled addict. More crucially, his personal relationships were becoming increasingly volatile. He was married briefly to Lori Allison, a makeup artist, in 1983, a marriage that lasted only a few years. There were relationships with various actresses and models. And in 2009, Johnny Depp began a relationship with actress Amber Heard, who was nearly 23 years his junior. This relationship would ultimately become the hinge upon which his public reputation would turn. It's crucial to understand the context in which the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard relationship developed. By 2009, Johnny Depp was nearly 50 years old. He had been famous for decades. He had accumulated an enormous amount of wealth. He had experienced the particular kind of isolation that comes with extreme celebrity. He had decades of substance abuse history. And he was in a relationship with a woman who was 23 years younger, an actress herself, ambitious and struggling to establish her career. The relationship was on and off for years. They married in February 2015, in a brief ceremony on a private island. By accounts from both parties, the relationship was volatile from the beginning. Both of them would later describe incidents of physical violence. Both claimed to be victims. Both claimed the other initiated violence. What's crucial to understand is that Johnny Depp's public image did not collapse because of private disputes with a romantic partner. Millions of relationships are troubled. Millions involve arguments and, tragically, violence. What made this situation different was that it coincided with a larger cultural moment, a moment in which the treatment of women in the entertainment industry was finally being examined, questioned, and in many cases, condemned. In 2016, Amber Heard filed for divorce. Shortly after, she published an op-ed in the Washington Post in which she described herself as a victim of domestic abuse. She did not explicitly name Johnny Depp, but the implication was clear to anyone who knew the timeline. For Johnny Depp, this moment was a crisis point. The careful image he had constructed, the serious actor, the artistic rebel, the sensitive man, was suddenly being directly challenged. He was being publicly accused of domestic violence. And more significantly, he was being accused at a time in American culture when such accusations carried enormous weight and often resulted in immediate condemnation. Depp denied the accusations. He claimed that he had been the victim of abuse, that Heard had been violent toward him, and that the public narrative was fundamentally unfair. But by this point, the narrative had already begun to shift in the broader culture. The #MeToo movement was in its infancy, but it was powerful. Women who came forward with accusations of abuse and assault were increasingly believed. Men accused of such things found themselves facing rapid professional and social consequences. In 2018, Depp sued the British newspaper The Sun for defamation over an article that referred to him as a wife-beater. The newspaper defended itself by producing evidence related to the allegations from Heard. The case went to trial in 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, in London. The trial was dramatic, filled with testimonies and allegations from both sides, conflicting accounts of what had actually happened, and a great deal of painful detail about a troubled relationship. The judge ruled largely in favor of The Sun, finding that they had proven the substantial truth of their statements about Depp. For Depp, it was a devastating loss. The judgment seemed to confirm, in a legal sense, that he had been abusive. The media coverage was extensive and largely negative. But then something unexpected happened. In 2020, during the initial defamation trial, the deposition of Amber Heard began to circulate online. In it, Heard appeared to discuss instances in which she had been violent toward Depp, including allegedly cutting off the tip of his finger with a bottle. Suddenly, social media, particularly TikTok, which had emerged as a powerful force in shaping public opinion, began to present a different narrative. The narrative that emerged was that Depp was actually the victim, that Heard had been the abusive party, and that a combination of feminist bias and media narrative had unfairly demonized Depp while protecting Heard. This counter-narrative grew substantially throughout 2021 and into 2022. In 2022, Depp sued Heard for defamation in Virginia, related to her op-ed in the Washington Post. The trial was televised. It became a cultural phenomenon. Millions of people watched the trial unfold in real time. Depp's legal team presented a compelling case that the relationship had been mutually abusive or that Heard had been the primary aggressor. Heard's legal team presented evidence of Depp's violence and substance abuse. The jury sided largely with Depp. He won most of his claims. It was a vindication of sorts, a public legal victory in the court of American jurisprudence. Consider, for a moment, what had actually happened. By the time the Virginia trial concluded in 2022, Johnny Depp had spent years in an extraordinarily public, extraordinarily painful legal battle. His private relationship struggles had been dissected in courtrooms, on social media, in news outlets around the world. He had been accused of serious crimes. He had been partially exonerated, but that exoneration itself had become another spectacle, another narrative to be consumed and debated. More importantly, during this entire period, from 2016 to 2022, Hollywood had effectively abandoned him. The major studios that had once clamored to cast him in leading roles largely avoided him. His career, which had been so carefully constructed over decades, suddenly seemed to be in free fall. Think about what this means. A man who had built his entire adult life around cinema, around acting, around artistic expression, found himself unable to work in that industry. The roles dried up. The offers stopped coming. At a time in his life when he might have been moving into elder statesman status, becoming the kind of actor who plays meaningful supporting roles or mentors younger actors, he was instead being sidelined. This is where the tragedy becomes most poignant. Johnny Depp is 62 years old now. He is no longer young. He is no longer the beautiful boy with the haunted eyes who captivated audiences in Edward Scissorhands. He is a man in the latter part of his life, and the industry that defined him, that consumed him, that promised him meaning and purpose, has largely rejected him. Some work has come. He acted in a film about the French King Louis XV. He appeared in films that were not released through major studios. But the big roles, the prestigious projects, the collaborations with great directors, these largely dried up during the years of litigation. And this raises a crucial question: was it worth it? The legal victory, the social media vindication, the court judgment in his favor, was any of it worth the cost to his career, his reputation, his life? The answer, almost certainly, is no. What makes the story of Johnny Depp tragic is not that he was guilty of terrible things. What makes it tragic is the way in which a human being, flawed, certainly, but also talented and sensitive and deserving of dignity, was caught in machinery far larger than himself. He was caught in the machinery of celebrity, in the machinery of social media, in the machinery of changing cultural narratives about gender and power and abuse. By 2022, some of that narrative had shifted back in his favor. He had become something of a symbol for men who claimed to have been victims of false accusations. He had become a rallying point for those who felt that the pendulum of gender justice had swung too far. But in becoming a symbol, he had become something less than a full human being. He was no longer Johnny Depp, a complex, talented, troubled artist. He was Johnny Depp, the man who was defamed, or Johnny Depp, the victim of false accusations, or Johnny Depp, the vindicated, depending on which social media feed you were reading. But to focus only on the legal battles would be to miss the deeper tragedy of Johnny Depp's life. The deeper tragedy is the tragedy of a man who struggled with addiction for most of his adult life, who never quite found the tools to manage it, and who was enabled by a system that profited from his talent even as it destroyed his well-being. Let's be clear, Johnny Depp is not the first actor to struggle with substance abuse, nor will he be the last. Hollywood has always attracted people with addictive personalities, people who are sensitive and capable of feeling things deeply, people who use substances to modulate their emotional experience. The entertainment industry has always been complicit in enabling this behavior. Studios have covered for addicted actors. Enablers have surrounded them. Consequences have been delayed or avoided. Johnny Depp has spoken publicly about his struggles with addiction. He has acknowledged using marijuana, cocaine, and heroin. He has been to rehabilitation facilities. He has worked with doctors and therapists. But by his own account, he has never fully escaped the grip of addiction. And here's where the tragedy deepens. As he aged, as his capacity to bounce back from substance abuse declined, as his body and mind began to show the wear of decades of drug use, he was simultaneously facing the most publicly humiliating experience of his life. The legal battles with Amber Heard happened at a time when he was at his most vulnerable, at his most in need of stability and support and healing. Instead of stability, he got courtrooms. Instead of support, he got social media. Instead of healing, he got vindication. One of the most poignant aspects of the Johnny Depp story is the way it illustrates the failure of the people around him to truly help. Where were the friends who could have helped him get clean? Where were the family members who could have intervened? Where were the industry professionals who might have suggested that he step back from public life, take time to address his demons, and return to work in a healthier state? Instead, what happened was that the machinery of celebrity continued to turn. The lawsuits continued. The media coverage continued. The social media debate continued. And in the center of all of this was a man slowly being destroyed by circumstances beyond his full control. To truly understand the tragedy of Johnny Depp, we must remember what he was. In the 1990s and early 2000s, he was an extraordinary actor. Not every role worked. Not every film was successful. But when he was right for a role, when a director understood how to use his particular gifts, he was capable of something genuinely beautiful. Consider Edward Scissorhands. Depp plays a literally unfinished being, a creature of metal and scissors, created by a lonely old man and left incomplete. The role required an almost inhuman grace, a way of moving through the world carefully, constantly aware of the potential for harm. Depp's performance is heartbreaking. Without a lot of dialogue, he conveys loneliness, longing, and a kind of innocent goodness in the face of a world that cannot understand him. Or consider Sleepy Hollow, Tim Burton's adaptation of the Washington Irving story. In this film, Depp plays Ichabod Crane as an intellectual, a sensitive man struggling with his own fears and the violence of the world around him. It's a strange role, but Depp inhabits it completely. He is both ridiculous and deeply human. This is what's tragic about the later years of Johnny Depp's career. The man who gave these performances was still alive, still capable of such work. And yet, the industry that had once championed such work largely turned away from him. The role offers dried up. The meaningful collaborations with serious directors diminished. He became available for work, but not the work he wanted. He became a man with time and resources but without purpose within the industry that had defined him. With wealth comes the ability to control one's environment. And with that control comes a particular kind of isolation. Johnny Depp, by most accounts, has retreated from public life in recent years. He lives on a private island. He travels in private. He is protected from the general public by layers of security and distance. But isolation is a cruel companion for those struggling with addiction. And it is an even crueler companion for those struggling with the psychological weight of public humiliation and professional abandonment. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the human condition is watching someone with genuine talents and gifts become isolated from those gifts. Johnny Depp spent decades creating art, and that art mattered. His performances moved people. His choices as an actor showed a real artistic integrity and bravery. And now, in the latter years of his life, that channel for expression has largely been closed off. This is not to say that he is unable to work. Certainly, if he chose to, he could find projects. Independent filmmakers would likely work with him. But the fact remains that the major studios, the major directors, the major roles, these are largely unavailable to him. Think about what this means for a man who has defined himself through his work. Think about what it means to suddenly find yourself in your early 60s, with the knowledge that the best years of your career are behind you, and the public reason for those best years ending is a traumatic personal relationship and a very public legal battle. To be clear, this documentary does not seek to definitively answer the question of what happened between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. The legal system has made its judgment. The courts have weighed evidence and made determinations. But the question of absolute truth in a relationship between two people is often irretrievable. What we know is that it was a troubled relationship, that both parties claim to have experienced abuse, and that the public airing of this relationship has had significant consequences for both individuals involved. The tragedy of Johnny Depp is not solely about whether he was guilty or innocent of the charges against him. The tragedy is deeper than that. It is the tragedy of a man who made certain choices, perhaps some good, perhaps some bad, certainly some complex. and who found himself at the convergence point of multiple powerful forces, his own demons, the machinery of celebrity, the machinery of social media, and the machinery of changing cultural narratives. He was not uniquely powerful. He was not uniquely culpable. He was a human being caught in a system that was not designed for human flourishing. And the outcome has been tragedy. Johnny Depp is 62 years old. He has been famous for nearly 40 years. He has experienced the apex of celebrity and, now, a kind of professional exile. He is alive, he is wealthy, and he is largely removed from the public eye, though occasional news stories remind us of his continued existence. In 2023, he was reportedly working on a film project, marking a return of sorts to acting after a period of reduced visibility. But these projects are not the prestige films of his earlier career. They are not the Tim Burton collaborations or the serious dramatic roles. They are more modest projects, the kind of work that once might have seemed beneath him but now represents opportunity. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of the Johnny Depp tragedy. There is no clean ending. There is no closure. He did not achieve redemption through vindication. He did not disappear. He did not experience a clear-cut destruction or fall. Instead, he persists in a kind of limbo, no longer a major star, but not entirely finished either. An aging man trying to find a place in an industry that has largely moved past him. The question that lingers is this: will he achieve a kind of elder statesman status? Will younger filmmakers or newer audiences discover the depth and beauty in his work and allow him some kind of resurrection in his later years? Or will he continue in this diminished capacity, a living symbol of the particular cruelties of celebrity in the modern age? The story of Johnny Depp offers several lessons to anyone willing to listen. First, it is a lesson about the danger of absolute fame. When someone becomes too famous, when they lose the ability to move through the world as an ordinary human being, certain kinds of damage become inevitable. They are insulated from normal consequences, but also from normal connection. This isolation, over decades, can be profoundly damaging. Second, it is a lesson about the chemical cruelty of addiction. Johnny Depp's substance abuse was not a character flaw or a moral failing. It was a disease that he struggled with throughout his adult life. And the system around him, the industry, the enablers, the people who profited from his work, did very little to help him address it. Instead, they enabled it. They looked the other way. They allowed him to continue producing work even as he was clearly suffering. Third, it is a lesson about the way that modern social media can magnify personal tragedies into cultural events. What might have been, in previous eras, a private legal battle became instead a mass spectacle. Millions of people who had no direct knowledge of Johnny Depp or Amber Heard nonetheless felt compelled to take sides, to debate the details, to participate in the narrative. This is not because people are cruel, but because social media has made it extraordinarily easy to participate in other people's tragedies. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, it is a lesson about the way that cultural narratives can shift with enormous speed, and how being on the wrong side of such a shift can be professionally and psychologically devastating. Johnny Depp was not uniquely guilty of anything. He was a man caught at a particular moment in history, when the conversation about power and gender and abuse in the entertainment industry was reaching a fever pitch. He became a symbol in a larger debate, and in becoming a symbol, he ceased to be fully human. As we survey the landscape of Johnny Depp's life at 62, what emerges is not a simple story of failure or vindication, but rather a complex portrait of a human being navigating impossible circumstances. He is reportedly sober now, or at least attempting sobriety. He is working on occasional film projects. He has expressed interest in music again, returning to the passion of his youth. He has tried to live more quietly, away from the glare of publicity that once defined his existence. But the damage has been done. Years have passed. The industry has moved on. A new generation of actors has taken the roles he might once have played. The cultural conversation has shifted. He is no longer at the center of anything. He is a figure from a previous era, a symbol of a different Hollywood, a relic of a time when male actors had more power and fewer consequences. Is there any way in which this story ends well? Is there any redemptive arc available to Johnny Depp at this stage of his life? Perhaps. Perhaps some younger filmmaker will recognize the genius that remains in him and create a role that allows for meaningful artistic expression. Perhaps he will find peace in a less public life. Perhaps the passage of time will allow for a kind of forgiveness, both of himself and of others, that is not available in the heat of the moment. Or perhaps this is simply where it ends. A man in his 60s, once famous, now peripheral. A man who was brilliant at his craft but unable to fully manage the personal demons that accompanied that brilliance. A man who was caught in circumstances not entirely of his own making and who paid a price for that. To understand the tragedy of Johnny Depp fully, we must also understand that it is not unique. It is the tragedy of celebrity itself, magnified and made particular in the story of one individual. The entertainment industry has always been built on a kind of Faustian bargain. The artist receives adoration, wealth, and the ability to reach millions of people with their work. In exchange, they lose privacy, autonomy, and often their sense of self. The machinery of celebrity demands constant feeding. It demands new roles, new projects, new controversy. It does not allow for rest or healing or the simple human needs for peace and connection. And the people around the celebrity, the agents, the managers, the handlers, the enablers, are often incentivized to keep the machinery running regardless of the cost to the individual at the center of it. If an actor is using drugs, but still able to perform, the show goes on. If an actor is psychologically fragile, but still bankable, the system grinds forward. The human being becomes secondary to the machine. Johnny Depp is not the first person to experience this. He is not the first artist to find his life consumed by the demands of celebrity. He is not the first person to struggle with addiction while the system around him looked the other way. But his story is particularly poignant because he was genuinely talented, genuinely committed to his craft, and genuinely deserving of a better outcome. What will Johnny Depp's legacy be? This is the question that haunts the latter years of his life. Will he be remembered primarily as a brilliant actor who gave the world Edward Scissorhands and Sleepy Hollow and From Hell? Or will he be remembered primarily through the lens of the legal battles with Amber Heard and the social media debates that surrounded them? Likely, he will be remembered as both. And in being remembered as both, he becomes a kind of divided figure, one for those who remember his artistic achievements, another for those who discovered him primarily through the viral spread of his legal battles. This, too, is a tragedy. Because it means that the achievements of his earlier life, the genuine beauty and artistry of his best work, will forever be accompanied by the trauma and humiliation of his later life. Future generations will not be able to discuss Johnny Depp without also discussing the personal and legal turmoil of his early 60s. It is as if the final chapters of his story have been written not by him, but by circumstances and by the cultural moment in which he lived. The tragedy of Johnny Depp is the tragedy of a human being who was born into a particular moment in history, with particular talents and particular vulnerabilities. He was offered the keys to the kingdom, fame, wealth, artistic opportunity. But those keys came with chains attached. Chains of addiction. Chains of publicity. Chains of the machinery of celebrity. He did not ask for those chains. Certainly, he made choices that contributed to the difficulties of his later life. But he was also a product of his times, shaped by forces larger than himself, caught in a system that was not designed for human flourishing. At 62 years old, Johnny Depp finds himself diminished. His career in the form he knew it is largely behind him. His reputation is complicated and contested. His personal life has been dissected and debated by millions of people who do not know him. His struggles with addiction remain ongoing. And yet, he is still alive. He is still capable of work. He is still a human being, deserving of dignity and compassion and the opportunity for peace. The tragedy of Johnny Depp is not that he was guilty of terrible things. The tragedy is that he was a complex, talented, troubled human being caught in circumstances not entirely of his own making. The tragedy is that the system around him did not save him. The tragedy is that his later years have been marked by loss and isolation and the erosion of meaning. And perhaps most tragically, the tragedy of Johnny Depp is also a tragedy of our culture. It is a tragedy of a